Welcome to the Gen Z Marketer podcast, where we have marketing conversations and everything in between. Here we talk about marketing, branding, e commerce, and the power of integrated marketing communication. I'm your host, Jamia Umali, a strategist passionate and specializing in branding and marketing for e commerce. No, everyone, it's been a while since I actually updated something or uploaded in the podcast, and finally, at least I have really dedicated time to upload episodes. And for this episode, actually, I invited a guest. The reason why I invited her is because I wanted to revisit one of or a couple of my previous episodes, which talked about essentially why marketers or why employees quit and of course the red flags when you're looking at job openings. So the person I invited is an HR manager that I had before, and dare I say one of my favorite HR managers of all time. Please welcome everyone, Valerie Tamayo. Hi Val, how are you?
Hi, Jamie. It's nice to hear your voice again. Thank you so much for having me. I feel very honored to be invited here in your podcast. As you've mentioned, it has been a while since your last recording, so I'm very grateful that you got me as your first guest for your comeback. Actually, before this guesting, I was able to listen to a few of your episodes, and allow me to say that I am so proud of you, like having a platform like this, talking about things that matter. These things really make a difference because you'll never know who needs to hear it. So I hope you can continue doing this and inspire others to do the same.
Oh,
There.
thank you. Thank you so much, Val, for that. I truly appreciate it. And of course, yeah, because I'm very much familiar with who you are. I mean, we worked together for a couple of years. But of course, for people who are listening who have no idea who you are, why don't you tell them a little bit more about yourself and then your experience in HR?
Okay. All right. So, hi guys. My name is Val. As Jamie mentioned, we have been working together for quite some time. I've been in HR for, let's say, 13 years, I guess. And I basically have experience working for several industries already, like corporate, BPO, real estate, even creative and advertising. And I've also made my way up the corporate ladder. Like I actually started from someone doing cold calls, like the one who invites you for interviews, to basically interviewing applicants, to administering exams, filling up classes, to creating policies, to handling a department. It's actually, a fun experience. Funny thing is, fresh out of college, I knew then that I wanted to be an HR. I'm not sure why, but I guess it's about having that connection with people. It draws me into making it into a career of my own. So basically, that's why I lasted for 13 years working as an HR there.
Right. Yeah, that's very interesting. So essentially, Val, at this point or throughout your career, you pretty much had like a pulse no, in everything related to HR. You had exposure to all of the different facets that make up HR, right?
Oh yes, yes, definitely. I think when I was an intern, that started my interest. I like talking to people, like just asking what was your past experience, what do you look for in a job, what are your expectations, etc. So for me it felt very natural talking with applicants, and I really saw myself doing that as a career.
Right. So I actually like that you mentioned about applicants, right? Because one of the things that HR is heavily involved in is really interviewing potential employees for the
Mm-hmm.
company. And I don't think a lot of brands or businesses realize, but other than your branding for like customers, right? Let's say you're a retail brand, you have your external branding. You also have internal branding. And when you say internal branding, of course, we have that identity, the values, but the idea is for internal branding that really affects your employees, right? That really sets the culture or the tone in the company, whether you're traditional or you're more modern, whether you believe in, oh, well, of course, this is relevant to my work as a strategist before, what kind of values are you, very, I guess, collaborative, things like that. And yeah, I think a lot of employees do not realize the impact or the role of HR in branding or internal branding, and that as early as interviews, you can already get an idea on what the brand is like or what the company is like, because there's that internal branding wherein potential applicants can see like, oh, this is what the company is like, other than what they see, let's say in your LinkedIn, in your job street, or maybe even your website. HR essentially is already the representation or the personification of what the internal or corporate brand is like, right? So on
That's right.
that note, of course, what do you think, or how else does HR play into corporate branding or internal branding?
Okay. Well, HR plays a very important role in corporate branding. As the role implies, it's basically human resources. So it's all about the people behind the output, and it's about the environment that people choose to belong to. When I say environment, as you've mentioned, it's not just the physical office, but it also involves, the vision, the goals, the values, ideal mentorship, and success. So if HR fails to create a safe space for people, not only does it affect the output, but it affects the company as a whole. And basically, the HR person is the first person that you get to meet when you go to interviews. So having a good first impression really counts on both ends.
I like that you mentioned that HR is really the first people that, of course, potential employees meet. Because I
Mm-hmm.
remember us having a similar conversation last year when what happened, the company we worked in. I remember
Right.
you specifically mentioning that HR is always at the front line, the first defense when it comes to, in general, like taking care of employees, and at the same time, like being the mediator of course, between management and employees. So I really like that you mentioned that, and I had that, recall of all of a sudden of what we talked about before. Because I
Right.
agree 100%. It's not just, of course, like when you're already in the company. It's also when, as early as you're interviewing, it really sets the tone already, right?
Right. That's right.
So of course, since we're talking about that, there's definitely an impact, right, with HR in terms of company growth and culture. So how big is that impact, and what is that usually like?
Mm. Oh, that's huge, actually. Based on my experience, like I strongly believe that HR is the backbone of any company. Why? Because of two reasons. First, you obviously have a shared vision with the CEO, and that is to ensure that you hire the right people who would fit the positions that your company is looking for. And second, in order for those hires to stay, you then need to create and to protect an environment that would make them want to stay. Because each employee has his or own priorities or checklist when accepting a job offer. If I probably have to sum it up into three categories, that would be salary, growth slash opportunities, and of course, a good working environment. Just like the company wherein they have job qualifications. Now, employees get quote unquote fired when they fail to deliver what is expected of their performance, and sometimes even because of behavior. On the other hand, employees leave when they see and feel that the company fails to deliver what was promised to them. So it worked both ways. HR plays a crucial role as it serves as the middle ground for management and its employees. So it's very important that uh, one of the top priorities of HR is really about taking care of the people, because you basically marketed, your company to them. You sold that idea to them. So your job as an HR doesn't stop when they sign the offer. It actually continues on until, until you give their final pay there.
Of course, it's not just about career development, right? Or yeah, getting people to fill in roles. It's also about really taking care of the people to make sure they stay, right? Because if there's a high turnover rate, that's actually more costly to companies. And the
Correct.
idea is, right, if you take care of the people, they would take care of, work, right? And of course, since we're talking about, HR being the backbone, or all of these things, I think there are some misconceptions about what HR's role is, like in terms of, the company or what they contribute. So what do you think are some of these misconceptions that you would like to debunk?
Okay. Maybe the most common and funny misconception is that when you're an HR, I don't know, you're expected to be mataray. It's funny,
Oh.
actually. I think I have a good guess why people tend to say that. Maybe because when an HR calls you for a meeting, employees feel that it has something to do with poor performance or bad behavior, but actually, they just want to catch up and see how you're doing. But on a serious note, I feel like people still think that when you say HR, it just involves around recruitment and admin. But the truth is, it's so much larger than that because it involves training and development, people management, organizational structure, strategic planning, and business reviews. So when you say HR, you're basically the partner of the CEO. So you work together, you make plans together to ensure that, the company survives, and not just monetarily, but also you have to think about how these employees would actually mature and grow in your company. So that's big.
I like that you mentioned it's like marketing to the employees who applied, right? Because if we're looking at it based on the metaphor you mentioned, it's like, yeah, internal branding and marketing even. Because when you market at least to, let's say, customers of the business or the brand, the idea is you get them to buy, right? Or to believe in the brand. And of course, there's the lifetime value or long-term value that you want these buyers to continue buying or, patronizing the product or the service. So I feel like it's kind of that same metaphor like with what you mentioned that, oh yeah, HR is not just about hiring or recruitment. It's also making sure that people stay, right?
Hmm.
So
Yep.
yeah, it's because I really love the idea like we're discussing really the relevance or the importance of HR, right? Why it's important for businesses to really have like a strong HR team and strong HR initiatives. So can you share like a specific scenario in which you realize like how big exactly like, oh yeah, like HR is really the backbone or the impact that HR has for a company?
Okay. When I was working as a senior HR manager, part of my role was to help create an organizational structure that would make sense for that specific year. And that involves, reviewing the performance of each employee and checking if there was a need to shift some roles, merge some teams, etc. I'm not talking about HR roles alone, but it's all about, positions and departments. So I had to talk to the respective managers and also talk to the employees who will be affected by the change, like ask them how they feel about it, are you guys on board, etc. And once that's done, I need to report to the CAO, give feedback, have several meetings, and then do the necessary steps for the said restructure. So maybe that sounds tedious because it is, but it entails a lot of patience, understanding, and you really have to understand where the employees are coming from, but also at the same time, make smart decisions as part of the management team. Another thing that some businesses still fail to realize is that employees tend to stay not just because of money. As I've mentioned earlier, it's instead how you take care of them, how you listen to them, how you show respect and give importance to what they say. So HR plays a very important role in making employees feel that they're safe, and when employees feel this, they'll start to really care about the company and respect its goals more. So even if that you're given a negative situation, if you have that connection with your employees, they'll really understand what's happening, and not just have any negative feelings towards the management or the company, because basically they understand the whole scenario. And you know what? I've seen it. And as an HR who really loved her role and the company that she worked for, seeing my employees happy, grateful, and successful reminded me why I became an HR in the first place. Like, I like taking care of people, like what I said earlier. I like the responsibility, and it feels so natural to me talking about these things. So I'm very grateful that, when that incident happened last year, I didn't really have a hard time explaining the situation to the employees because I was able to have that connection with them. So there.
Right. I really like what you said because, of course, yeah, like we were talking about earlier, the idea is HR is really the backbone. They keep people together, they take care of people. And at the same time, they really have that huge impact because it's essentially like what you said, right? When you're helping, organize the team or making sure the people who are filling up the roles are right for that job, it's like making sure a machine is like, functioning well, like a well-oiled machine, like every part or every, of course, I don't like using the metaphor that we're parts, no, but essentially the idea is, everyone is really, optimized or working together to meet the goals, right, of the company. It's essentially like that. And of
Right.
course, with HR, with taking care of people, yeah, other than of course salary, there's definitely like your benefits, right? Your HMO, your allowances. A lot of different companies have like different initiatives, and I think HR is really at the forefront of those, right?
Correct. Correct. And that's why it's very important that you have a strong HR team, because they basically are the middle ground for employees and management.
Right. So since we're talking about like yeah the exactly what HR really contributes, why it's very relevant to businesses, and of course what happens when you don't really have like a proper HR or HR that really takes care of employees. Of course, the reality is there would always be something toxic in each company culture, and we're revisiting some of the old episode that I did about toxic company cultures. I mentioned these before. When it comes to toxicity, of course, there's poor management, lack of career growth, outdated company culture, being overworked, um, micromanagement, politicking, and competition, and of course, the impact of the work on mental health. So I think Val, definitely these are things that you've already dealt with in your career. So usually, as someone who works in HR, how do you, I guess, work around into like dealing with the toxicity in the companies? Like, how do you navigate through toxic company cultures?
Okay. One common toxic culture that I have experienced, there are a few, but maybe I can cite one that's most recent, and that's a fear based culture. By definition, it means that employees tend to be silent because of, let's say, intimidation, bullying, gaslighting, etc. So, tendency is they don't feel safe in their work environment. There's lack of trust between colleagues and managers, and the anxiety of not being able to deliver work kicks in. So one perfect example is that my HR team, previous HR team, whom I love so much and whom I am really grateful for, came up with a safe space session. I'm pretty sure you're very familiar with that. So this is a 30-minute or 1 hour sesh, which is basically centered on employees. So, meaning to say that they can book a consultation with my team. The discussion doesn't necessarily need to be about work, and they can talk about anything under the sun. It also works both ways. We can also book sessions with them if we feel that there are some who probably need, just someone to talk to. We feel that it's very important because not all are confident enough to ask questions to their managers. Some are shy, some are afraid, and some are even shy to actually talk to an HR and book with us. So we also did our part in reaching out. And this wasn't required, but we felt that it was so important that we had it once in a while because there were so many issues resolved just by talking. And I think communication is key, regardless if you're an HR or a manager or a CEO or a colleague, because a lot of things can really be resolved just by talking. So there.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that because of course personally I am a beneficiary of the safe space sessions, of the one-on-ones, and I personally would also say that yeah, the reason why you're like my favorite HR manager throughout my career is because you have these initiatives, right? Um, that initiative was really the time I felt most cared for, honestly, by any employer, because no other employer actually did that for me. And what I really liked about it is, like you said, it's really communication. It's not necessarily about talking like growth plans or training, or not necessarily about, let's say reporting a colleague that you're not, working well with. It could be anything under the sun. So I think it's really, building that bond and communication with employees. And at the same time, it actually makes HR less intimidating. Like that's one thing I'd like to
Right.
say, Val. It's you like since you've been doing that, I definitely didn't feel intimidated. I definitely like felt like, oh, okay, whenever there's something that's going on, I can talk to you, or of course Edre. Shout out to Edre, also does the safe space one-on-one sessions with me, with the team, and I really like it because yeah, it's really about, you know taking care of employees, and it's a way for you to bring up, like, let's say your concerns, no, not just necessarily about work itself, but even your personal life or concerns, right? Because eventually, as someone from HR, of course, you're free to comment on this. But since you're getting insights or you're understanding the struggles of employees, you of course get to make recommendations to like management of like how you can optimize or improve the processes, how you can take care of employees further, or what any kind of thing that needs to be resolved is addressed through safe space sessions. Of course, I think it's not necessarily HR spying on employees. I don't really see it that way. Some people might. I really think it's more, what I like about it. It's just like a very genuine and not too serious discussion, right?
Right. That's right. And I think once employees actually have that connection with you, everything else will just fall into place. Like you don't have to force your employees to, share something if they don't want to. So that's why we didn't make it as a requirement. So just book if you feel like it. It might be a 30-minute thing. It might you want to do it weekly, monthly. But we just want to be like a helping hand, because that's basically one of our top priorities.
Right. So of course, other than that initiative that you have, I would like to also point out or bring up one, that because we were talking about, of course, how work can essentially impact your health or your mental health. And I also like the fact that during, when we were working together, there would be speakers, right? Who you invite to talk about, certain different mental health um concerns for employees. And I really love that as well. I think you would know why. Some people close to me would know why, because of course I'm a very strong advocate for that. So I think that's one thing that I really appreciate, and I think something that companies can do, no, because not I think there are some companies that are starting to see, no, starting to understand why it's also important to take care of the mental health of employees. But I think not everyone realizes the gravity of it, right? If you, let's say, like there's a fear-based culture, or it's really toxic with the micromanagement, I don't think they really realize the long-term impact of it if they don't really resolve these issues, because it affects everything else, eh. It could affect their quality of work, quality of life. It would also affect, high turnover rate. I don't think they realize really the overall impact, no, the domino effect
Right.
of any, if you don't take care of people, or like how HR would do it, it's a domino effect then.
Correct. And basically, from my experience, then, like, people don't tend to share right away. So you wouldn't know if, your colleague has a problem unless she talks to you about it. But if she's the type who just, keeps quiet, keeps it in, and then here you are, you have these mental health talks, you never know. It might be the answer that that employee is actually looking for. So those simple things actually have a big impact. You just not know it, but I'm pretty sure that somehow it has touched a few employees already.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And I think because we're talking about this now, the fact is, yeah, there's a fear based, or sometimes most of the time, I think, regardless if you're an employee or not, like humans in general, you're not really sure who to talk to, or the comfort level. Like, mostly sometimes it's not your manager. There are managers you can easily talk to. There are managers who aren't. So I think it's really important to, of course, have that, open door. Like, I think the safe space is essentially like that. You're having that open door initiative for people to come in and talk with you. And at the same time, allowing, yeah, like you said, allowing people to come forward and have conversations and not forcing it. And at the same time, not intimidating people, no? The parang, uh, when people feel like they can't speak up, then they won't, right? I remember this,
Right.
this question that were you silent or were you silenced, right? So,
Mm.
diba? I remember that specifically. I think I saw on TikTok audio of that earlier when Oprah was mentioning it to Meghan Markle. No? Parang ako, I thought about it. Yeah, that's right. No, parang there's a difference between someone being silent or an employee being silent. Let's say they can't really speak up versus being silenced because they're intimidated by
Correct.
management or yung nga, HR is not. So I think it's very interesting that, of course, we we foster really a culture of, communication, like you said. But another thing that I also learned quite recently, I had an experience with like a previous employer. It's not just about communication because when you say communication, it's like you can talk to each other, right? But
Mm-hmm.
communication or talking with each other is irrelevant or, hopeless if there's no action taken, right? Or if there's no empathy and comprehension when it comes to communication. Because what I appreciate about having the safe space sessions with you actually is that when we bring up something, of course, as HR, you mediate or you take action on it. No, because there's that empathy and understanding of what needs to be done, to improve the culture or the work. But yeah, there was a scenario. I had that experience wherein no matter what you say, it's really hopeless because there's no action taken. So I think it's very interesting, those different tales that people need to realize, or even companies need to realize that yeah, HR really has one of the biggest impacts, of course, in terms of internal branding, internal company branding, because otherwise, if employees do not perform, it really affects everything else.
Correct. That's right.
So of course, Val, di ba, we talked about yeah for like taking care of employees who are struggling with toxicity. I'm curious to know lang because we're talking about the perspective of employees, right? What is it like for you when you talk to management when it comes to addressing like certain concerns or certain like issues in the company, and how is that usually like? What would be I guess how do you navigate it, whether it's I guess a time where you're in management this doesn't really listen or management listens, like what is it like for you general in navigating that, like when you're talking to management?
Honestly, of course, there were times that it was really hard, but the role basically requires you to be strong. You have to be empathic. You have to be understanding. But most of all, you have to be fair. When I say fair, it means that you basically will have to listen to two sides of the story. And you're not just saying this because you're management and you're not just reacting because you're an employee. It has to go both ways. So I had to remember that I was, of course, speaking on behalf of the upper management. So I also need to be very cautious not to disclose, any confidential information. But at the same time, I need to be transparent enough for employees to understand the situation. So again, having those safe space sessions really helped because we were able to have that connection with employees. When talking to management about, let's say, a certain issue, I feel that it wasn't that hard also for me. Maybe because I had a good relationship with my former boss. Like we were also very open. He's also very straightforward. I know that I don't need to take things personally when I'm talking to him because, basically he's speaking as a CEO. So he really needs to make, hard decisions, etc. So I think that's where we see eye to eye. Like I can address the issue straight on and just cite possible options for the employees and for management, and then we can decide how we can actually resolve the concern, because you can't always take sides. You always have to be in the middle and have to make both sides understand where each one is coming from. So yeah, there are times that it was hard, but I think I was fortunate enough to have that kind of working relationship with my former boss, because I can be as direct as I can be. Of course, I had times that I was really vulnerable. I even cried in front of him, but I think that's part of the process. Uh, it helped me grow as a senior HR manager, and now that I have a different path. It made me understand a different point of view more. Now that I took a different path in terms of career.
It's interesting that we're talking about this because earlier we were talking about misconceptions. And I think one common thought about HR that, I get to see in social media a lot or even people talk about is that HR is pro management. That is one thing that I always see or hear. And I guess, that's one thing I guess we can debunk that HR, yeah, in a way is pro management, but not, it shouldn't be, right?
Mm-hmm. I think when that's it, people also have different insights about that, but you just have to be. I don't know. It just depends on the kind of HR that you have, I guess.
Yeah.
Because from the past experiences that I've had to when I was still, being an assistant, a specialist, etc. I was able to see how it is to be pro management, and how is it to be very employee based kind of HR. So early on I knew what kind of HR I wanted to be. So I didn't want to be like that, I didn't want to be like this, I want to be like this. So when I was given the chance to actually start a team of my own, again, I was also grateful enough to have a team who share the same perspective about what it is really to be an HR. You really have to make hardball decisions because it's your job. You fire people, you hire people, you talk about cases, issues, concerns, promotion, attrition, retention, etc. But at the same time, you also have to think about that. You're there also for the people. You won't have employees if you don't take care of them. So I guess it's just a matter of perspective, how you deal with it. You can always deal with everything professionally. You just have to hear both sides of.
Yeah, that's true. Because I think HR isn't necessarily neutral. I would say I think it's more on having that objective for third party, like I guess, point of view, and at the same
Mm-hmm.
time having the initiative or yeah, the strength to actually be proactive in doing something and mediating when needed, taking care of people. Of course, that's non-negotiable. So it essentially HR is really about action. No, it's not just about being neutral or listening or doing whatever is on the table. It's really about consistent action and like we said earlier, taking care of employees from the moment they were as early as the interview stage until until they leave the company.
Right.
And I love how you were talking about how it's important, of course, the shared vision with like I guess team members. I think it's interesting that we were working together, at least for my team specifically. We had really good synergy, right? Like
Yes.
my team is personally like one of like if not my favorite team, definitely my favorite team because I like how everyone just got along with each other. Like, the work dynamics wasn't that complicated, and I think that's also an important role that HR plays. No, it's not necessarily getting the most qualified person. I mean that's one, but also making sure that there's synergy among everyone in the team, right? Because of course, if it's let's say it's not working well, of course there's going to be conflict or of course difficulty in getting the job done.
Right. And it basically makes things easy if you have like good working relationship with with your teammates, with your managers, etc.
Right. So of course, at one point, everyone moves forward to the different opportunities now for different reasons. And I think one common reason as to why people are leaving is because of the toxicity, right? Ako at
Mm-hmm.
one point, definitely, or at several points in my career, that's the reason why I leave. So, of course, everyone has a different kind of tolerance in terms of what they think is, toxicity that they're willing to tolerate, or different circumstances whether they'd stay in a company or not. But in general, regardless of whether it's toxic or not, what do you think is the best time for, like, say, employees in general to start exploring other opportunities?
Hmm. Well, maybe when they start feeling that what they're currently doing is literally not what was discussed during the initial stages, or even the interview, the job offer, the orientation. And once they start to ask about it, they really don't get a proper response. So treat it already as a red flag. Second, probably when the processes and roles keep on changing and there's no clear explanation in terms of expectations. So, of course, we can't hide the fact that there would be changes along the way. But the management or the HR team, they really need to address, why are you making these changes? What didn't work? Why are we changing this? Because if you keep on changing without any reason, or you don't really communicate it well, employees would really have no idea why these things happen. So if you don't get a definite answer for that, you may also treat it as a red flag. What else? Probably poor and slow payroll system.
Yeah.
Like consistent discrepancies in pay slips. Because honestly, it's very tiring to keep reminding the finance team or the payroll team to give me the pay slip. Why is this amount not right, or whatever. So these basic things shouldn't be a problem anymore. So I think that's already considered a red flag as well. And lastly, maybe if you can't trust your manager. When I say trust, you don't really trust him or her to do the right thing. He or she doesn't delegate the right task. He or she is not being transparent, because your manager is there to guide you. So if you don't feel that you're being guided, then I think that's already considered as a red flag as well.
Yeah, that's interesting because essentially it's like when you're not cared for enough, you're given too much work, you're overworked without the consideration of whether that's still part of your role or if you can still do it, and the basic, pay, whether it's delayed or any other benefits when you're not cared for on that context. And same thing with managers, if they don't have to provide the mentorship or the guidance like you mentioned. It's really rooted with the care, no, in general. When you don't feel cared for, that's the time to go.
Yes. And yeah, I like that you mentioned that because it's not just the HR's role to take care of people. It's also, the manager's role. You were there for a reason. So it's not just about giving tasks, ticking off tasks every day. You really need to be there for guidance. So you basically just need to do your job.
Okay. So yeah, I'm curious also to know, as we wrap up, of course, do you have any advice for, I guess, employees who, I guess, are struggling with a toxic environment, or what can they do if they want to, let's say, move forward? And especially, of course, I had this experience wherein the company essentially had major violations to the labor rights of employees. So in general, when we're dealing with something like this, what is usually your advice for employees?
Okay, so probably before accepting a job offer or even before applying for a job, you guys can actually do your research. If companies do background checks before hiring you, you basically have to do the same. Like checking their profile in LinkedIn, check their socials, what kind of posts do they have, do they share about culture, employees, or is it all about the services and the positions that they are hiring for? Because you have to remember that you'll be spending what, weeks, months, or even years with them. So it pays to know these things. And whenever an HR interviewer asks you, right, at the end of the interview, if you have questions, make sure that you have questions. You can basically ask about, the culture, how's the promotion process, do you guys train employees? Do you have mentorship? How's the attrition rate, etc.? Because having to know these things would really help you in terms of decision making. Employers need people. They need the right candidate to help their company meet their goal. But at the same time, employees also do the research, or they have their own criteria before accepting a job offer. So do your research. It pays to know these things. And probably if you find yourself in a toxic environment, you're already there in the company. I think it's very essential that you create a small bubble of, a safe space for you as well. It might not necessarily be with your HR, but maybe, a buddy at work. If you have the courage to tap your HR, then do so. And then, you just have to talk to them little by little. But if you feel that the current situation is, not really for you, then you may process your resignation. Like, don't waste your time in an environment that doesn't match your values. You might be missing your chance in working for the right company if you're still stuck with the wrong one.
Yeah, I love that you said that. And I'd like to add something about research now because it's important to get to know, of course, the company that you're entering, but also I think in general your rights as an employee. Because there are a lot of, I guess, for each company, of course, they have their own code of conduct or rules and processes. So I think it's important that you get to know your rights in general as an employee because sometimes the policies that companies have aren't necessarily like the right thing based on the labor code. So I think that's another thing that employees need to consider, the familiarity, of course, with the basics essentially of what they should be getting as an employee. Do you have any advice naman for like managers, of course, who want to put in the work towards the betterment of their company culture or even the internal branding? What is your advice for that?
Hmm. I'll answer this with a quote that I have always lived by. It goes like, "Be the senior you needed when you were a junior." This really helped me a lot of times because it gave me a better perspective in both decision making and people management. And as I've said earlier, managers are there to lead and to guide employees who would play a big part in reaching the company's goals. So there will be no employees to guide if there will be no managers that employees can trust.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah, I love that. That's very, very insightful. And I think our discussion in general, there's a lot I learned. And I hope that people who are listening also learned a lot from you because I think when we were talking about talaga before, like what you said about HR being the front line, and ever since that's something I reflected on, and then I realized it more so than ever with my recent experience. So yeah, like you said, HR is not just about hiring people, getting the right people, or managing payroll, things like that. HR really is the backbone. There's a lot of work that goes into it, and it really is about taking care of people, and of course at the same time making sure that the company as a whole is working well together. There's synergy, there's collaboration, and there's really a good culture, a good working culture with it.
Yep.
So before we wrap up, of course, Val is actually one of the people behind Manila Middle Ground. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit more about that?
Okay, all right, yeah. So early last year, backstory then, I was in the position to either continue my career as an HR or try to do something new. Like, I was so confident to choose the latter, so I did. And the confident Val in me said, na, if you can take care of your employees as if they were working for your company, imagine the difference you can make if you actually have a community that you can call your own. So yeah, along with two creative partners, we started a business late last year. It's called Manila Middle Ground. It's a creative retail and event space located in Comuna, Makati. So basically, it's still a safe space this time for creatives. Like, they can rent shelves or racks or uh, they can actually display their merch there. We also host exhibits and events like calligraphy workshops, design talks, creative pop-ups, ganyan. So if you want to do collabs, or you just basically need a space to host small to medium events, or you need a place to sell your merch, let us know. Yeah, so please follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Again, that's Manila Middle Ground. We have a lot of events lined up, and we hope that you guys can drop by our store and participate in some. There you go.
Thank you again, Val, for your time. Once again, guys, go check out Manila Middle Ground. And of course, if you enjoyed this discussion, make sure to follow our podcast to get notified on the latest uploads. Share your thoughts, suggest topics, or collaborate with me at the Gen Z Marketer Podcast on Facebook and at Gen Z MKT on Instagram.